Will Narendra Modi serve a third term? The Indian Prime Minister has launched his party's campaign for the upcoming elections, boasting of his achievements in the past decade. But what about his controversial views on Hindu nationalism? This is Inside Story. Hello there, I'm James Bays. Almost 1 billion people in India are eligible to vote in the upcoming general elections. Prime Minister Narendra Modi is widely expected to win a third term. Hoping to stop him, dozens of opposition parties have joined forces in a coalition to rival his Bharatiya Janata Party. Modi's been in power since 2014 and is credited with revitalising the economy. But his opponents accuse him of stifling dissent and crushing political rivals. So how much has Modi achieved, and are controversial views and criticism enough to force voters to seek an alternative leader? Plenty to discuss, but first let's set the scene with this report from Veronica Pedrosa.
Campaign season has begun in the world's largest democracy. Later in April, 6 weeks of voting will get underway in India. More than 968 million people are eligible to cast ballots for a new government in national elections. Modi, Modi, Modi. Prime Minister Narendra Modi is hoping to win a third term. Speaking to supporters in India's largest state, Uttar Pradesh, on Sunday, Modi said his cabinet was already hard at work.
We are creating a roadmap for the next 5 years. We are working on the decisions we need to make in the first 100 days of our next term.
Modi came to power in 2014. Never before had a chief minister with no federal experience become the head of government in India. His Bharatiya Janata Party won with an absolute majority for the first time in 3 decades. As Prime Minister, Modi is credited with transforming the country, making it one of the largest developing economies in the world, revitalising infrastructure, and even landing a space mission on the moon. But critics say his Hindu nationalist focus has shrunk the space for dissent. Minorities, especially Muslims, have been harassed and attacked, as have activists, journalists, and rival politicians. In a bid to challenge Modi and his party's dominance in this election, dozens of opposition parties have united to form a coalition called the Indian National Development Inclusive Alliance.
All the leaders have been arrested will be free when you uphold the Constitution. When it comes to the elections, you have to vote and press the button that removes this government and brings the rule of the people.
Opinion polls suggest Modi will be victorious and set him on a path to become India's longest-serving Prime Minister. Veronica Pedrosa, Al Jazeera, for Inside Story.
So let's get a measure of Prime Minister Modi's political ambition in discussion with our impressive panel of guests today. In the Indian capital, we have Yamini Aiyar. She's a public policy scholar who specialises in governance, politics and social policy. In New York, Ravi Agrawal is editor-in-chief of Foreign Policy magazine and host of its video channel and podcast, FP Live. He's also the author of India Connected, How the Smartphone is Transforming the World's Largest Democracy. And again, in New Delhi, we have Nilanjan Mukhopadhyay, a writer and journalist with a special interest in Hindu nationalist politics. He's also the author of the biography Narendra Modi, The Man, The Times. Thank you, all of you, for joining us. This is the biggest democratic exercise in the world. I was stunned to read that with 960 million eligible voters, that's more than the populations of the US, European Union and Russia combined. Nilanjan, starting with you. Of course, it's up to the voters, given how many I've just mentioned there are. But it looks very strong, doesn't it, for Prime Minister Modi? It looks like he is by far the favourite.
Well, at the moment, all the surveys say that Mr. Modi is a clear front-runner, that he has a clear-cut narrative, that the voters are looking at him as the only possibility, that the challengers have not been able to come together as it appeared, that all the opposition parties would be able to come together. But whatever little has been done so far as opposition consolidation is concerned, there are still a lot more has to be done. At the moment, yes, of course, the fear is that Mr. Modi getting a third term, it is going to be actually the most important election for him, because if he wins this, he is actually going to be stepping into some kind of a political immortality, becoming the first Prime Minister after India's first Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru to win 3 consecutive terms and get into office. It is also going to mean a lot for the future of India's democracy, for the future of India's development programs, and most importantly, but nonetheless, for the minorities, the religious minorities of the country, especially the Muslims and the Christians, and also people who disagree, who are not the minorities but are Hindus, but who disagree with Mr. Modi and his party, the BJP, it is going to get very difficult for the media, for the civil society, and for anybody who is willing to disagree and say their views openly in the public.
India, of course, has a proud tradition of democracy. This is its 18th general election. Ravi, in a forthcoming article, which you kindly shared with me in advance, you make the point that India has been shaped by democracy rather than culture and religion. And you just heard Nilanjan talk about Nehru, the founding prime minister. You say that he believed in a liberal, secular country that would serve as a contrast to Pakistan, which of course was formed as a Muslim homeland. Then you say, somewhat controversially, Modi in many ways is Nehru's opposite. Explain.
Well, that's right. Modi is, in terms of personality and background, very different from Jawaharlal Nehru. Nehru, of course, very anglicized, Cambridge educated, went by the first name Joe until his 20s, came from India's upper classes. And Modi has a very different background. He is from a lower middle class, lower caste background, and it doesn't shy away from that, really. This is a man who has a very different vision of what India should look like. The essay that I wrote, which you've kindly mentioned, I titled it The New Idea of India, and that's because, unlike Nehru, Modi's vision for India, while it does premise itself on electoral democracy and welfarism, it actually centers religion and culture in the state's affairs. And so Modi has, in a sense, a vision of a country that is Hindu first, that is Hindi first, which prioritizes a vision of what it means to be Indian. And it's a vision that not everyone in India agrees with, of course, but the way electoral democracy in India works is that he doesn't need everyone to agree with it. In 2014, when Modi won the election the first time around, his party did, I should say, his party only won 31% of the national vote. In 2019, his party won 37% of the national vote. And to do all of this, he only needs about half of all votes from India's Hindus. Hindus comprise about 80% of the 1.4 billion people in the country, of which, as you pointed out, 960 million can vote. So he's able to mobilize, in a way, the Hindu vote to be able to win elections in a way that is unprecedented in Indian history, and therefore furthering this vision of what it means to be Indian. In a sense, Modi is, while on some counts, democracy has been eroded in India, whether it's freedom of the press, whether it's free speech, whether it's freedom of the courts, Modi still succeeds at the polls. And he has turned and is turning India into a classic illiberal democracy, where he's still able to further his vision, his idea of India at the polls, but to do so in a way in which classic liberalism, as we see it in the West, and as Nehru believed in, has been shunned. And this is something that I should say is quite popular in India, again, as evidenced by Modi's electoral success in 2014, in 2019, and presumably in the next few weeks.
Yamini, Ravi makes a good point there about the share of vote, because it's worth remembering this is a parliamentary first-past-the-post system, but his BJP party seems to be very, very good at translating. It's got an election machine to translate the votes into seats in the parliament.
Absolutely. I think just to build on what my fellow panelists have said, there are two things to keep in mind. One, the contestations of what it means to be Indian, or what the imagination of India as a modern nation state is, have had a deep history embedded in the freedom movement leading up to 1947, when India got independence, and the framing of the Indian Constitution. The idea that India has a deep civilizational history that brings together into the formation of the modern nation state post-independence is one that is fairly widely accepted. And critically, through the independence movement, whether we were a Hindu nation or a nation whose civilizational ethos was one of wider tolerance, of pluralism, of diversity, diversity of religion, diversity of ethnic diversity, diversity of language, diversity of region, that's the site of contestation. And when India gained independence, our founding fathers, not just Nehru, there was a broad sort of consensus within the constitutional, which framed the Indian Constitution, that India, in fact, rejected the two-nation theory, that there is a Hindu India and a Muslim second nation, that indeed India was a genuinely secular nation with the undergirding of pluralism and tolerance built in to our everyday life and into our imagination of a modern nation state. In this sense, what the project of India was in some senses very different to the project of modern nation states, say in Europe, which tended to cohere around the idea of a singular ethnic identity, national religious identity, and national identity. What made India unique was this coming together, what the political scientist Yogendra Yadav has in a different context referred to as a state nation rather than a nation state. It is this idea that is now being contested with a far deeper unitary imagination undergirded by Hindu nationalism, which is very majoritarian in its imagination. It also is translating into a very different kind of democracy. While Ravi is right that in some senses we have a vibrant electoral democracy, and it is on the basis of that electoral democracy that the Hindutva project is gaining legitimacy. Modi himself is undoubtedly a remarkably popular prime minister. It's rare for a prime minister to go into a third term, to seek a third term and yet be a front runner, remarkably popular. But it is worth recognizing that the nature of his governance, in fact, is placing several pressures even on the fundamental dynamics of electoral democracy. What are the two conditions of robust electoral democracy? Active contestation and opposition, contestation of ideas, contestation on policy, and widespread participation. We're doing well on participation. Indeed, increasingly, in fact, women's participation in voting has increased remarkably. But when it comes to active contestation, there are significant challenges. In fact, I would go so far as to say these are really, really increasingly serious. Serious in the form of...
Okay, let me bring in Nilanjan there. And on the whole issue of Hindu nationalism, yes, I mean, Hindus are by far a majority, 80%, but in a country so vast, 20% is a huge number of people, about 300 million. I mean, do you not, in a country like India, need to govern for all?
Yes, of course. You know, it is very clear that in an ideal situation and in something that is morally correct, you need to actually govern for all. But if you have the numbers on your side, as Mr. Modi has, he has not really been governing for all. And if they continue with the same kind of electoral performance which they had in 2014 and in 2019 and get a majority for the third time, maybe even a bigger majority, then I think that they are going to become more emboldened to be able to govern only for the majority and put more demands on the minorities, especially the Muslims and the Christians, to assimilate themselves within the majority Hindu community. That has been a long-standing demand of the Hindu nationalists in this country, that everybody in this country is a Hindu, regardless of the faith that they practice, that they openly say. Mr. Modi, in fact, even told me that, people are welcome to practice various religions, but they must actually, accept our ideas and the ideal characters and our great people who are concerned. So they must be accepted by the minorities also. There's a second question, which keeps on coming up in all our discussions, that India's, they get a majority which is electorally very, well conducted. I think, it's time now for us to actually look at the manner in which India's elections are conducted, especially in this particular moment. We need to flag two very important issues which have surfaced in the past few weeks. The first is about what is called the political funding. It has been talked about for a long time that political parties in India get funding from various corporate houses in a very discreet manner, for which there are quid pro quo arrangements, but this was never proven. There's also been a lot of talk about slush money being used in Indian elections, what in Indian vocabulary is called black money, something which is actually unaccounted money, which is actually going at a completely different channel. In 2017 and 2018, Mr. Modi's government had passed laws to create a new system of political donations. Now, that system of making political donations has been recently struck down in the month of February. Just in February, it was struck down by the Supreme Court of India, and the data has been put in the public domain. So the data which shows that overwhelmingly more than 50% of the political donations were given to the BJP. The names of the donors are out there in the public, and we can actually link. There are various civil society organizations as well as very specialized media organizations which is trying to track down the various quid pro quo arrangements, that you make a donation, you can either escape imminent arrest by the law and order machinery, or a policy is changed which benefits a particular company which made that donation. So these instances are being proved. The second most important
I'd like to come back to some of the other criticisms
to the election body.
Nilanjan, I'd like to come back to some of the other criticisms of the opposition a little later in the programme, but sure. I think it's important just to set the context here with regard to India's current situation, Ravi. You're sitting there in New York right now. In the US, the view certainly there is that it's the economy stupid in elections in the United States. India is the fastest growing major economy in the world. I mean, is there any but to that?
There is. The immediate but is that it's starting from a very low base. So it's much easier to grow faster when you're starting from a low base. There is also a greater imperative to grow faster. India needs rapid, high-speed growth to be able to pull more people out of poverty, to be able to expand its middle classes, to be able to compete with its neighbors, to compete with other Asian countries. If you look at how India's GDP per capita has grown since, say, 1970, countries that were at the same point as it then, China, South Korea, are orders of magnitude bigger in terms of the size of their economies. So in that sense, India has a lot of catching up to do. It has been growing fast over the last decade, 15, 20 years or so, not fast enough, many would say. One of the things that this administration, Modi's administration, has focused on a lot, you've heard the term welfareism in this discussion already, is the delivery of subsidies and services to people. Piped access to water, for example, has quadrupled in the last decade. Electricity connections have expanded dramatically in the last decade. Toilets, for example, have been built across the country. Whether these work or not is another point. One of the things that this administration in particular is very good at is marketing whatever gains it does make. But it has a very mixed record despite these advances on welfareism. For example, this government, for example, has not been able to attract enough foreign direct investment, which has actually declined in recent years. It has not been able to urge its own companies within India to invest in the economy as much. Much of its state spending, infrastructure spending is internal. That's not good enough. It needs a lot more. So there are things and forces that continue to hold India's economy back. It is not growing as fast as it should. Youth unemployment is a serious problem in India. It has a higher rate of youth unemployment than many of its peers in the region. Women are chronically underemployed. And yet, despite all of this, you have the paradox that Modi is actually quite popular among women. So it's not easy to have a simple answer on the economy. It's a mixed picture.
Okay, let me bring in Yamini now. Ravi there talked about how good the government is at marketing. Much of that marketing is around the one man. I mean, do you think it's fair to say there's a personality cult going on here? I've only been in recent years once to Delhi, which was at the end of last year for the G20, and rarely have I seen a city where there is a poster of one man in so many places. It wasn't quite the scale of Saddam Hussein's Iraq that I could remember, but it was getting close.
Absolutely. The governance style of the BJP is very much one of centralization built around the personality cult of Mr. Modi. And the beauty of his marketing is that it has very carefully been deployed to build and further the charisma and the personality cult of Mr. Modi himself. So all these welfare schemes are very much sold as Modi's guarantees. You see the Prime Minister's photograph everywhere as crucial to it. And by the way, it's not just the Prime Minister. We have a much more vibrant set of political parties that are governing at the state level. They've all picked up on this. And you see a similar version of how welfare schemes are being marketed now increasingly at the state level. What's key in this are two things. One, with the use of technology, India has been able to graduate rather quickly into a kind of welfareism based on direct benefit transfer. So it's basically transfers in cash and kind that are delivered directly into beneficiary bank accounts, into beneficiary homes, and they cut out the layers of intermediaries that were critical without technology in order to deliver welfare schemes. What this direct benefit does is that it very effectively then creates a very direct and very emotive connect with the beneficiary, the voter. So when you talk to voters, Ravi mentioned women voters. Mr. Modi is very popular amongst women voters. They will tell you, Modi has given me this, or the chief minister has given me that. So building that emotive connect, which creates a kind of politics that is very much based on loyalty and trust of the patron, the benefactor, the politics of Vishwas, as political scientist Nilanjan Sirkar has called. Vishwas means trust. It's about extracting votes on the basis of trust and belief that this is the benefactor who can indeed help us in difficult times. And that might
let me bring back in Nilanjan now, because the other thing, of course, that people repeatedly allege is that there are autocratic tendencies. Can you tell me how worried you are with regard to the election? Because there's been arrests, there's been what's called tax weaponization, tax terrorism, the opposition call it. They've been, I think, currently one of the demands is now being put aside until the end of the election, but they've been told to pay huge amounts of tax. How worried are you about a fair and free campaign and election here?
Well, the opposition parties have called the 2024 elections as a fixed match. You already have, besides the tax notices which have been served on the Congress party, 2 chief ministers of democratically elected states have been arrested. You have the hugely popular chief minister of the Delhi state, that is Arvind Kejriwal, who started this newbie party about a decade ago called the Aam Aadmi Party, the Common Man's Party. He has had an overwhelming majority whenever it comes to local elections in Delhi. He has been arrested and been put in jail. In another state, which is in the northeastern, in the eastern part of India, that is Jharkhand, which is essentially a tribal belt of the country. There also the chief minister has been put in jail on all cases or allegations that they have participated in various corrupt practices. Now, Mr. Modi has come to this stage, been able to win elections in 2014 and also in 2019, primarily on focusing on the issue of corruption. In 2014, he leveled massive corruption charges against the then Congress-led coalition government. But in 10 years, he has not been able to get a single conviction. All the cases which are filed have been dismissed by various levels of court, including the highest ones. So we really do not know the kind of offensive which he has mounted against the adversaries regarding corruption, whether this will ever get proved or not. Mr. Modi definitely, because of the advantages which he has, because of what Ravi said, marketing, also publicizing, runs one of the biggest publicity machinery which any political leader runs in the world. He can actually
let me finally bring in Yamini there, because we've heard there from Nilanjan the obstacles the opposition say they're facing. But even though the opposition have come together as an alliance, are they still not somewhat disorganised and divided? Is it partly the weakness of the opposition here as well?
An election requires a fair contestation. The fact that 95% of cases against that have been initiated by investigative agencies are targeted at opposition politicians, that the bulk of political financing has been centralized into the ruling party, are all indications of the extent to which the space for contestation has been curbed. Sure, the opposition is perhaps a little bit divided and is trying hard to build out its narrative, but it doesn't necessarily have a free and even space in order to be able to do that. Ultimately, an election can only be a fair contest if everybody gets a level playing field. When civil society is curbed, when you use investigative agencies against only targeted opposition politicians, when you weaponize law, there's limited space for equal contestation, for sharing of ideas, and for the voters to be presented with a wide range of options before they make their choices when they go to the polling booth. So this is not necessarily
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, all of you. Thanks to all of our guests today, Yamini Aiyar, Ravi, Agrawal and Nilanjan Mukhopadhyay. There'll be plenty of coverage of the elections which start on April the 19th here on Al Jazeera, with detailed analysis on our website, aljazeera.com. We'd like to hear your views on the election and other issues. Go to our Facebook page, that's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story, or we're on X, where our handle is @AJ Inside Story. From me and the production team here in Doha, please stay safe. Bye-bye for now.